Have you ever wondered what the most terrifying thing is in murder cases? Is it the brutal way the killer carries out the act? Or the moment when the victim realizes they are about to lose any chance of continuing to live? But for many people, the deepest fear lies elsewhere. It is when justice never comes, when the truth is buried, and the person who committed the crime may still be living a normal life among us. Every year, countless young women have their futures taken away. They have dreams, families, and people who love them unconditionally. Yet all of that can vanish in a single moment of violence. The case you are about to hear today is not just the story of a death. It is a story of betrayed trust, of irreversible mistakes, and of a system that nearly convicted an innocent person. We travel now to the state of Arkansas, in the southern United States, where a 19-year-old girl, beautiful, talented, and deeply compassionate, lost her life inside her own apartment. Her name was Nona Dirksmeer. Nona's death did not only shatter her family. It tore apart a small community, one where everyone believed they had already found the killer. Until the truth began to emerge, piece by piece. Ask yourself this: what if the person the entire town hates is actually innocent? And what if the real perpetrator had been very close to the victim from the very beginning? This is a case that has never brought peace to those left behind. And the biggest question still remains in the end: who did justice truly stand with? Nona Dirksmeer was not born into a loud or glamorous family. Her story began quietly, much like the person she would later become. Nona's mother, Carol Yvette LaPenta, was once a young music student at Louisiana State University. There, she fell in love with her instructor, Paul Dirks. That love led to marriage. And then Nona was born on December 26, 1985, in the small town of Zachary, Louisiana. A day after Christmas, when the world was still glowing with lights and hope. But not every child born during the holidays is granted a complete childhood. After Nona was born, the family moved to Dover, a peaceful town where everyone knew one another. There, Nona grew up as a quiet, withdrawn child, shy and reserved. While other children ran around laughing and playing, Nona often chose to be alone, listening to music or sinking into her own thoughts. Few people knew that behind her timid exterior lay deep wounds. At a very young age, Nona suffered abuse at the hands of her own biological father. No one knows when it began, how long it lasted, or how severe it was, because Nona never told anyone. She carried that pain with her throughout her childhood, in silence. No cries for help, no one to cling to. Just a child learning how to endure far earlier than she should have had to. In 1996, when Nona was only 11 years old, her father passed away. For many, it was a loss. But for Nona, it was also the end of a chapter filled with fear. After his death, she slowly began to change. No longer living under constant anxiety, Nona grew stronger. Even though the wounds in her heart never truly disappeared, those years shaped who Nona became. A gentle, sensitive girl who deeply understood the pain of others because she knew exactly what it felt like to grow up wounded. And it was during that time that Nona took her first steps toward learning how to trust people, trust life, and trust herself. Childhood trauma does not disappear just because time passes. It stays, quietly, hidden deep within the mind of a child forced to grow up too soon. After her father's death, Nona entered a new phase of life. The daily fear was gone, but the memories remained. There were nights when she lay awake, not because of noise outside, but because of thoughts she had never put into words. Nona learned to stay silent, to observe, to read other people's emotions, just to be sure she would never disappoint anyone. That was what made Nona uniquely sensitive. She could sense sadness in others before they ever spoke. She understood what it felt like to be unprotected, unheard. And because of that, Nona always tried to become the person she herself had needed as a child. At school, Nona was not the kind of student who stood out, but teachers remembered her for her kindness and attentiveness. With friends, she did not speak much, but once she opened her heart, she was deeply trustworthy. She listened more than she spoke and never dismissed anyone's pain. Music became Nona's safe refuge. When everything felt too heavy, she turned to familiar melodies. There, she did not have to explain or hide. Music allowed her to be vulnerable, to cry, and then to stand back up again. Gradually, from a wounded child, Nona learned how to heal herself. Not by forgetting the past, but by accepting that it was a part of who she was. Those scars did not weaken her. On the contrary, they shaped her into a deeply compassionate young woman, always drawn to those who were fragile just as she once was. That was Nona's quiet rebirth. Not loud, not dramatic, but resilient and profoundly human. When Nona entered her high school years, her world gained a new shade of color. That was when she met Kevin Jones. Kevin was not the kind of person who made an immediate impression. He was an ordinary boy, friendly, easygoing, and especially patient. They met the way many school friendships begin: casual conversations in class, group study sessions, and shared academic stress. At first, they were just friends. Friends who listened to each other. For Nona, Kevin was one of the rare people who made her feel safe. She could be silent without being questioned, speak her thoughts without fear of judgment. Kevin never tried to change her or force her to be someone else. He was simply there. Over time, their closeness grew into something deeper. Their love came slowly and gently, no drama, no intensity. It was the kind of love built on understanding and respect. They grew up together, studied for exams together, spoke about the future in simple, hopeful ways. Nona was never someone who trusted easily, but with Kevin, she allowed herself to believe. And Kevin loved Nona not for her appearance, but for who she was: her gentleness, her compassion, and the way she cared for others even while carrying her own pain. For many years, their relationship showed no signs of violence or serious conflict. Friends and family on both sides saw them as an ideal couple. Kevin was often by Nona's side during her hardest moments, offering quiet, unwavering support. With Kevin, Nona seemed to find a piece of the peace she had lost so early in life. It was not a passionate love, but the comfort of being with someone who would not hurt her. No one, not even those closest to them, could have imagined that this seemingly solid relationship would later become the center of suspicion, accusation, and the greatest injustice of Kevin Jones's life. In 2004, Nona left Dover to begin a new chapter. She enrolled at Arkansas Tech University, majoring in music education. It was not just a career choice, but a way for her to remain connected to the very thing that had once saved her during her darkest days. Russellville was a larger, busier city, filled with new challenges. There, Nona began living independently, away from her family's protection. For many young people, this meant freedom. For Nona, it was also a test of trust and maturity. Over time, Nona grew into a young woman who naturally drew attention. Her beauty was not flashy or sharp, but gentle and pure. Her singing voice carried a deep emotional quality, allowing listeners to feel sincerity in every note. Yet, strangely, Nona herself never saw that beauty. Her past trauma left her constantly doubting her own worth. When friends encouraged her to enter beauty pageants, she hesitated for a long time. Eventually, she agreed. Not for titles, not for the spotlight. Nona stepped onto the stage with a single purpose: to use her voice to speak for children who had been abused, children like the girl she once was. She understood that some wounds leave no marks on the skin, yet follow a person for a lifetime. Nona competed, won titles, and appeared before the public not as a symbol of beauty, but as a storyteller. Someone willing to speak about what many chose to keep silent. She participated in volunteer work, collaborated with child support organizations, and listened to fragile lives with empathy and care. There was a rare gentleness about Nona. She never spoke grand words or cast blame. She simply showed up close enough for others to feel understood. That was why people loved her, not for her looks, but for her heart. This was the period when Nona shone in her own way. Not loudly, not flamboyantly, but meaningfully. And just as she began living most fully as her true self, fate quietly prepared a cruel turning point, one no one could have foreseen. Nona's final days passed so gently that no one sensed anything amiss. Winter settled over Russellville with its familiar calm. Streets were decorated with lights, shops played Christmas music, and people busied themselves preparing for family gatherings. For Nona, Christmas held a deeply personal meaning. It was a time of forgiveness, love, and hope. Despite carrying many scars from the past, she still believed people could treat one another with kindness, at least during the final days of the year. On the evening of December 24, 2005, Kevin drove from Dover to Nona's apartment in Russellville. There was no big party, no elaborate gifts. Just two young people sitting together, talking, laughing, and enjoying a rare moment of peace amid life's demands. They talked about future plans, about school, about work, about a future still far away, yet close enough to smile about. There were no signs of an argument, no words filled with anger, just an ordinary evening between two people in love. After midnight, Kevin left the apartment to drive home. The road from Russellville to Dover was quiet, streetlights stretching through the still night. When he arrived, Kevin called Nona, as was their habit, to let her know he was home safely. Nona answered. The call was brief, but enough to close out a peaceful day. The next morning, Kevin overslept. When he woke and checked his phone, he saw a message from Nona, a familiar, gentle good morning text, full of affection. Nothing in the message suggested any cause for concern. Kevin knew Nona had plans that day, so he didn't rush to disturb her. He assumed she was busy with volunteer work and would call later, as she always did. No one knew that this very normalcy would make what followed so devastating. Because sometimes, the greatest tragedies do not arrive with noise. They come in silence right after life's most peaceful moments. That morning passed like any other. Kevin began his day with the familiar belief that Nona would call back soon. But as time passed, the phone remained silent. No calls, no replies. At first, Kevin reassured himself. Nona was often busy with volunteer activities. When she focused on her work, she rarely checked her phone. Thinking that, he tried to push away the unease beginning to form. But by noon, then afternoon, the silence became unsettling. In more than 4.5 years together, they had never missed each other's calls. No matter how busy she was, Nona always found a way to respond, even if just to say she was okay. Kevin called. No answer. He texted. Still no response. A cold feeling slowly spread through his chest. It was not jealousy or frustration. It was instinct, the very human sense that something was wrong, even if he couldn't yet name it. While riding with his mother to a Christmas party, Kevin couldn't hide his worry. He told her Nona had never been this silent before. His voice wasn't panicked, but it carried enough weight to reveal the growing unease. Kevin kept calling Nona. The silence remained suffocating. Finally, he sent a short message, half joking, half desperate, clinging to the fragile hope that she would reply. But the phone stayed still. Before the party even began, Kevin could no longer sit still. His worry was no longer vague. It became a heavy pressure in his mind. He left early, with a single question repeating over and over. Where was Nona? And why wasn't she answering? That was the first moment when peace completely disappeared. And it was also the moment the door to tragedy quietly began to open. When Kevin left the Christmas party with his mother, the sky over Russellville had already faded into a cold grey. The year-end air was biting, but what he felt inside was colder still. The entire drive, Kevin barely said a word. He stared straight ahead, one thought looping relentlessly in his mind. I have to get to Nona right now. Earlier, Kevin had asked Ryan, a friend who delivered pizza, to swing by Nona's apartment, since Ryan's route passed through the area. When Ryan stood at her door, he called Kevin and said the lights inside were on, but no one came to open it. That one short sentence was enough to make Kevin's heart tighten. When Kevin and his mother arrived, Nona's apartment was unnaturally quiet. No music, no footsteps, no sign of life. Kevin dug through his pockets for a key, then realized he didn't have it. He knocked, rang the bell, called Nona's name. Everything fell into silence. Panic began to overtake reason. Kevin remembered the glass sliding door at the back of the apartment. Nona was always careful. She usually placed a bar in the track to secure it. But when they ran around to the back, Kevin went numb. The bar was gone. For a moment, he still tried to reassure himself that maybe Nona had simply forgotten to lock it. But when Ryan stepped closer, put his hand to the glass, and looked inside, he suddenly screamed, his voice cracking with terror. Ryan said he could see her. Inside the apartment, Nona lay motionless on the floor. Naked. Not moving. Kevin burst in as if he could no longer feel anything around him. He dropped to his knees beside Nona, turned her over, and held her tightly as if holding on long enough would make her wake up. Blood soaked his hands and smeared onto his clothes, but Kevin didn't care. He called her name again and again, his voice trembling, breaking, laced with despair. Kevin tried to revive her. He wiped the blood from Nona's face, searched for breath, tried to believe there was still time. But Nona's eyes were shut, cold, unresponsive. When Kevin's mother came upstairs, she froze at the sight. In panic, she whispered that maybe Nona was gone. It was the sentence no one wanted to hear, but everyone was terrified to admit. While they waited for emergency responders, Kevin kept Nona in his arms, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again. His tears fell, mixing with the blood on the floor. There was no dramatic screaming, only choking, broken sobs, the sound of someone who had just lost the most precious thing in his life. Minutes later, police and paramedics arrived. But that moment, the moment Kevin saw Nona one last time, in that small apartment, became a wound that never healed. A fateful instant where love, fear, and loss collided, leaving behind a tragedy no one could undo. When first responders and police reached Nona's apartment, the initial chaos slowly gave way to the heavy stillness of a homicide scene. Flashing lights outside, rushed footsteps inside. But at the center of the room, Nona still lay there motionless, as if time had stopped around her. Paramedics quickly confirmed what everyone feared to hear. Nona was dead. She was only 19. The scene suggested that Nona had been stripped of her clothes. On a nearby table, police found a used condom. That detail immediately made many suspect a sexual assault, but preliminary examinations found no evidence that Nona had been raped. What the medical examiner documented afterward was even more horrifying. Nona's body showed multiple injuries. Her face bore signs of blunt force trauma. On her neck and shoulders were shallow cuts, as if the attacker had used a knife not to kill immediately, but to control and intimidate. The final cause of death was a fatal blow to the head. Near her body stood a floor lamp, its heavy base stained with blood. Experts believed the killer had used that very object to deliver the killing strike. In addition, the medical examiner found that Nona's hyoid bone in her neck was broken, a clear sign she had been strangled with tremendous force. That pointed to a chilling truth. The killer didn't just want to hurt Nona. He wanted her dead. Taken together, these details form the picture of an extremely violent murder. Not an accident, not random, but a deliberate act carried out in a short window of time, yet with savage intensity. At the same time, the crime scene was not preserved the way it should have been. Kevin had held Nona. Ryan had touched the door. Multiple responders and officers entered and exited the apartment, moving around, unintentionally disturbing crucial traces. The original positions of several pieces of evidence were not documented accurately. In that room where a young woman had lost her life, the truth began to grow fragile. The very traces that might have led to the killer were gradually obscured by human chaos in the face of death. And in that atmosphere, before the grief had even begun to settle, a single investigative direction quietly took shape. One name began to surface more than any other possibility: Kevin Jones, the boyfriend. The first person to find the body. The man about to enter the greatest nightmare of his life. That very night, as shock still gripped him, Kevin was taken to the police station. Not to be comforted, not to be supported, but to answer the first questions about the death of the girl he had loved for years. At first, Kevin believed it was simply routine. He recounted every detail of the day, from leaving home, to the unanswered calls, to the moment he saw Nona lying motionless on the floor. Each word trembled. Each memory felt like another blade cutting deeper into his grief. But the atmosphere in the interrogation room quickly changed. The questions stopped feeling like information gathering. They became rapid, repetitive, and carried an unmistakable assumption. Kevin could feel it. He was no longer treated as a grieving boyfriend. He was being looked at as a suspect. Police focused on one thing: Kevin was the boyfriend. Kevin was the last person to see Nona. Kevin was the one who found the body. In their minds, everything seemed to fit together too neatly. Kevin was held for hours. He was questioned about his relationship with Nona. Had they fought? Was he jealous? Did he know anything about the condom found in the apartment? Each question felt like a disguised accusation. When Kevin denied any involvement, police suggested a polygraph test. Exhausted physically and mentally, Kevin agreed. He believed the truth would protect him. But in that cold room, with wires attached to his body, Kevin was no longer himself. He was anxious, confused, hesitant in his answers, and the result came back as failed. From that moment on, everything was nearly decided. To the police, the test became confirmation of what they already believed: Kevin Jones had killed his girlfriend. Rumors spread beyond the station. Whispers in a small town quickly hardened into certainty in many people's eyes. Kevin, once a well-liked young man, became someone to distrust. The looks people gave him were no longer sympathetic, they were wary, judgmental. Meanwhile, Kevin hadn't even buried the person he loved. He hadn't even been able to grieve fully for Nona. But he was already forced to face a brutal reality. He hadn't just lost the greatest love of his life, he was also beginning to lose faith that the truth would ever be heard. And from that moment, the road to justice started to veer into something dark. Once police believed Kevin was the killer, the investigation no longer seemed to search for truth. It began searching for details that could support a predetermined theory. And from there, a series of serious mistakes followed. The case was assigned to an investigator who had never handled a murder before. Immense pressure, limited time, and perhaps inexperience. Together, those factors produced a chain of decisions that slowly warped the truth. At the scene, blood was found not only around Nona's body. Blood also appeared near the front door, on the curtains, and in other parts of the apartment. Yet those areas were not examined thoroughly. Fingerprints were not fully collected. No comprehensive analysis was done. Nearly all attention remained fixed on the area around the body. The standing lamp, believed to be the murder weapon, became the center of the case. On the light bulb, police found a bloody palm print. And that print was identified as Kevin's. To them, it was undeniable proof. But the problem lay elsewhere. Kevin was the one who held Nona after finding her. He tried to resuscitate her, touching objects around him in panic. His prints on the lamp could easily have been left after the crime. That possibility, however, was largely ignored. In fact, when technicians continued examining the lamp, they found additional fingerprints on the body and base, the parts most likely to be gripped if the lamp were used as a weapon. And those prints did not belong to Kevin. They belonged to an unidentified person. That fact was not emphasized, not pursued. It drifted through the case file like an unimportant detail. Another crucial piece of evidence was Nona's phone. When it was found in the apartment, the battery had been removed. That suggested someone had intentionally disabled it. Yet the device was not immediately examined for fingerprints or data. Time passed. When Kevin's attorneys requested access to analyze the phone, they discovered the entire contents had been erased. Outgoing texts, incoming messages, Nona's final calls, all gone. Police later admitted they had returned the phone to the family, believing it no longer had investigative value, a decision that seemed minor, but it permanently closed one of the most important doors to the truth. Even the polygraph collapsed under scrutiny. The examiner who administered Kevin's test did not have full professional certification. The result, one of the reasons Kevin became the prime suspect, was not legally reliable. Piece by piece, cracks in the investigation became visible. The evidence wasn't cohesive. Procedures weren't sound. And above all, An early assumption had dictated every decision that followed. Amid all these contradictions, Kevin wasn't just trying to prove he was innocent. He was fighting a system that had already chosen him as the easiest answer to a complicated case. And as the holes grew harder to ignore, one question began to echo in many minds. If Kevin wasn't the killer, then where had the truth been lost, and who was truly behind Nona's death? Kevin Jones's trial was moved to another town not far from Russellville. The decision was made because the atmosphere where Nona had lived had become suffocating. Rumors, prejudice, and judgment had spread faster than the truth. Even before the trial began, many people already believed Kevin was guilty. In the courtroom, Kevin sat quietly beside his attorneys. He was no longer the carefree young man he once was. His face was gaunt, his eyes exhausted, yet he tried to hold himself steady. Across from him sat Nona's family people, carrying a grief no one could ever replace. The prosecution presented the case as a simple story: a jealous boyfriend, a burst of rage, a death in a moment of lost control. They argued that Kevin went to Nona's apartment, saw something that made him furious, and killed her. But when it was the defense's turn, cracks appeared in that narrative. Kevin's attorneys pointed out contradictions in the prosecution's timeline, unexplained gaps, statements that didn't match. They highlighted the testimony of Kevin's grandmother, who said she saw him at a gas station at the very time. The prosecution claimed he was at Nona's apartment. The main physical evidence the state emphasized was the bloody palm print on the lamp. But the defense asked a simple question: if Kevin was the killer, why were there fingerprints from another person? Someone not Kevin on the lamp's body and base, the very areas most likely held while using it as a weapon. They brought up the phone with its erased data, the disturbed crime scene, the fact that Kevin had no injuries, something difficult to reconcile with a violent attack. Question by question, the defense didn't need to prove Kevin's innocence beyond all doubt. They only needed something more powerful in a criminal trial: reasonable doubt. After hours of arguments, the jury withdrew to deliberate. The courtroom sank into silence. Kevin lowered his head. Nona's family gripped each other's hands. No one spoke, but everyone understood what came next would change many lives. When the jury returned, the tension was suffocating. And then the verdict was read. Kevin Jones was found not guilty. In that instant, emotions broke open across the room. Tears of relief. Tears of devastation. No one truly won. A 19-year-old girl was still gone. And justice, though it had avoided one terrible mistake, still could not provide a complete answer for Nona's death. For Kevin, it was freedom from legal imprisonment. But the pain of losing Nona and the psychological scars of the accusations would follow him for the rest of his life. When Kevin's trial ended, many believed the story was over. But for Kevin, and for his family, the truth still hadn't been found. A 19-year-old girl was dead, and the real killer was still out there. Unable to accept that uncertainty, Kevin's family decided to pursue answers themselves. They hired Todd Steffi, a part-time police officer, to conduct an independent investigation. Todd approached the case not with bias, but with a simple question: if Kevin is innocent, where was the overlooked evidence? The answer lay in a detail that seemed small: the condom found at the scene. During the original investigation, it had not been fully analyzed for DNA. Todd had it tested again. The result left everyone stunned. The condom contained the DNA of a man, and that man was not Kevin Jones. That lead opened an entirely new direction. Police began reviewing people who lived near Nona's apartment. They searched through a neighborhood that had seemed peaceful, where no one imagined darkness could hide behind closed doors. And then one name surfaced: Gary Dunn. Gary lived in the same apartment complex as Nona. His unit was directly across from hers, with a window facing her home. A position too convenient for watching. Too convenient for tracking her habits, her schedule, her private moments. When Gary's DNA was compared, it matched the DNA on the condom. The picture grew even darker as other neighbors were interviewed. They described Gary as a closed-off man. Quiet, Little social contact. Few visitors. He had only recently moved in, and almost no one truly knew him. Gary's wife later said her husband had been watching Nona for a long time. He knew when she came and went. Knew she loved animals. Knew she often brought food for the stray cats around the complex. Inside the apartment where Nona was killed, police found an unopened bag of cat food. A small detail but chilling. It suggested the killer may have used Nona's kindness as a way to approach her. A theory formed on that fateful day. Gary knocked on Nona's door using the cats as an excuse. When Nona opened trusting, as she always tried to trust, he forced his way in and attacked. Gary was arrested and charged with murder. But he did not confess. In court, he maintained a disturbing calm, as if he understood that even with the truth pointing toward him, proving it would not be easy. For those following the case, a cold realization settled in. The killer may have been right across from Nona the entire time, watching her. Waiting, striking when she was least guarded. A predator in the shadows, hidden inside ordinary life, revealed only when it was far too late. But even with DNA pointing to a new direction, the road to justice for Nona was still long. And what happened next would prove that sometimes, knowing the truth is still not enough to bring fairness. When Gary Dunn went to trial, many believed justice had finally found the right path. After all the mistakes, wrongful suspicions, and years of waiting, the name truly connected to Nona's death was finally placed before the court. But once again, justice was not as simple as people hoped. In the first trial, prosecutors focused on the DNA evidence. The condom found in Nona's apartment carried Gary's biological material. It was the strongest, clearest link tying him to the scene. They also presented testimony that Gary had stalked Nona for a long time, along with a history of violence against women. The defense did not deny the presence of DNA. They challenged it. They argued the sample was only a partial match. They stressed that the crime scene had been severely contaminated. And they repeatedly dragged Kevin Jones's name back into the courtroom, planting the question of whether someone once acquitted might still be involved. Those doubts were enough to shake confidence. The jury deliberated for hours but could not reach a unanimous decision. The trial ended in a deadlock. No verdict. No answer. A second trial followed. This time, Gary's past was brought into the light. Years earlier, he had attacked a woman who was out jogging. Though he wasn't convicted of attempted murder, he was sentenced for serious violent conduct. For Nona's family, it showed who he truly was. But again, the truth wasn't heavy enough to hold. The defense kept hammering on the flaws of the original investigation. They claimed evidence had been contaminated. They argued no one could pinpoint when the DNA was left behind. And they repeated the same principle: if doubt remains, no one can be convicted. The outcome of the second trial was the same as the first. The jury could not agree. Justice stalled like a machine running out of fuel, unable to move forward even one more step. Gary Dunn was released, not because he was cleared, but because the system could not prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. For Nona's family, it was a cruel blow. They had watched hope rise twice only to be extinguished twice. No conviction. No closure. Only a painful emptiness where justice was supposed to be. Nona's death still had no final resolution. And after 2 attempts, justice seemed to falter, leaving behind people still waiting, still aching, still desperate for a fair answer. After all the trials, accusations, and controversy, life was forced to go on. But no one in this story could ever return to who they were before. Nona's death left a void nothing could fill, and its aftershock spread to everyone still alive. For Kevin, even after being found not guilty, he never truly escaped the case. In many people's eyes, suspicion still lingered. In his own mind, memories of Nona resurfaced every day. Some nights he dreamed of her still with that gentle smile, that familiar voice, only to wake up and realize he could not turn back time. Kevin chose a different path. He decided to study law, not out of ambition, but because of the bitterness of his own experience. He understood what it felt like to be doubted, judged, swallowed up by a system where the truth is not always treated as the highest priority. Today, Kevin lives a quieter life. He has a family of his own, a stable career, and devotes much of his effort to defending people who find themselves in situations like the one he once endured. It is how he keeps living, carrying Nona's memory as an inseparable part of who he is. As for Nona, she remains forever 19. Dreams unfinished. Plans never fulfilled. A life full of compassion cut short in silence. No final verdict can bring her back. Gary Dunn is currently serving time for other offenses. But his name remains tied to a haunting question: was he truly the one who took Nona's life, or is there something still hidden, never fully revealed? And that is why this story cannot truly end. When a person has died but the truth remains blurred, justice becomes fragile. Nona's case leaves us with an aching question in this world. Does justice always find its way? And if it doesn't, who will speak for the lives taken in silence?